to display the slides, so I will show them on my computer very soon. We should start in 1 minute. Okay, it looks like everyone is finally set, so we all good to go. That's all great. Sorry about that, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this side event, to the Geneva meetings of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I'm François Monnier, head of the Oceans program at Planet Tracker. As you can see, I'm not actually in Geneva right now, as my flight was severely delayed, and I would like to sincerely apologize for this. However, we have in the room in Geneva, James Hardcastle, head of protected and conserved areas at the IUCN. Thank you for joining, James. We're very glad and honored to have you here. Today, we will speak about the role investors can play in the efficient conservation of marine protected areas. Let's start on the next slide with a quick word on Planet Tracker. We are a non-profit think tank, part of the Investor Watch Group. As the name implies, investors and financial markets in general are the primary audience of the research we produce, but not the only one. So for those of you in Geneva, don't worry, you are in the right room. Next slide, please. And what will we discuss today? In short, we will find out why marine protected areas often struggle to achieve their conservation objectives and see how to change this. In particular, we will introduce a new financial instrument that could at the same time provide additional funding for MPAs and boost their conservation efficiency. To start the discussion, James Hardcastle will tell us about the financing ambitions of the IUCN, and we will then open the floor for questions. Please use the Q&A function of Zoom, and it will be then up to you to decide how to take this forward. So let's jump in immediately with a sobering reality check. Marine protected areas are struggling. The next slide will show that recent research shows that potentially 70% or more of them fall short of the conservation goals. This means that the majority of MPAs do not achieve the goals for which they were created. Clearly, this is a major issue, and worryingly, it provides ammunition to those opposed to the creation of new MPAs. It therefore needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Let's try to understand what is happening. Firstly, a quick note on area-based targets. I am sure you all know that 10% of the world's marine area was due to be protected by 2020. Even though marine protected areas have expanded by a factor of 10 globally since 2000, only 9 countries have achieved the target. Globally, we are at 7.9% now. There are calls for a new, more ambitious target of 30% by 2030. There are many good reasons to reach such a target, but we have to be realistic. And the next slide will explain why. Measuring success in area terms is not appropriate. There is a quote from a scientific paper that analyzes conservation progress that I like. It says, measuring conservation progress in square kilometers is equivalent to measuring progress in healthcare by the number of patients treated, even though most of the treated people were healthy because they were cheaper to treat, and most of the people needing treatment went without. Indeed, MPAs can be located where it is convenient to minimize opportunity costs rather than maximize conservation goals. For instance, if you look at this map that shows the level of protection of different MPAs from the impact of fishing, you can notice an interesting pattern. Fully protected MPAs tend to be sited in very remote areas. The next slide, therefore, will bring me to the definition of protection. What does protected actually mean? A study called the MPA Guide, released last year, offers a simple and powerful answer. The degree of protection of MPA is defined by the occurrence and impact of different activities listed here. For fishing, for instance, if industrial fishing occurs, the area cannot be considered protected. But some other lower impact forms of fishing are okay. One disturbing fact is this analysis by Oceana from 2020, which found that across all 3,449 MPAs in the EU natural network, 72% of sites, or 99.9% of the network by area, were affected by at least one damaging commercial activity, such as dredging or fishing. Just to continue on the topic of protection and fishing, here is a quick analysis we did. MPAs that fall under IUCN category 1A, 2, or 3 are typically, but not always, no-take areas. In contrast, MPAs pertaining to all other IUCN categories are very rarely no-take areas. As a result, fishing in close to 2/3 of MPAs globally by areas and less than 3% of the ocean is fully or highly protected from fishing impact. On the next slide, let's talk about another factor that limits conservation efficiency. On the next slide, please. It is the lack of monitoring. This is a key issue for MPAs. Focusing again on fishing, here is a practical example in the Mediterranean Sea. Each of the dots here represents a fishing vessel. In orange are fishing vessels that are detected by satellite imagery, but not monitored by AIS, an identification system where the largest fishing vessels transmit the position by satellite. In green are the vessels who are already monitored by AIS. So the orange vessels are fishing vessels that operate without being monitored, whilst the green ones are monitored. I am by no means saying that the orange dots indicate illegal activities, because many of these are small vessels, not required to be monitored by AIS. I just want to stress that only a proportion of the actual fishing activity in a given area is monitored. And I found this map from Global Fishing Watch quite telling. Clearly, for increased conservation efficiency, increased monitoring is needed. But of course, this requires money. Many papers have reviewed the key challenges that MPAs face. And in summary, two key challenges, won't surprise you, are funding and adequate staff. 9 out of 10 of the MPAs analyzed lack adequate staff, and the global funding gaps for MPAs is estimated goals. there are already many ways for MPAs to raise funding from public and private sources and in many forms, such as grants, taxes, debt instruments, etc. You have a full list here. The details don't really matter here. It is a long list and I won't go through it. The point I want to make is that maximizing and optimizing existing solutions is crucial before coming up with new ones. However, that's on the next slide. Here is one new instrument that could really help MPAs become more efficient. The next slide will explain the key idea behind this instrument. The key idea is to link funding to conservation efficiency. For that, the steps to take are relatively simple in theory. It's about estimating the funding required for conservation goals to be met, come up with a time-bound plans to achieve them, and then decide on a way to measure conservation progress. To measure conservation performance, although different ways exist, a simple and globally recognized one is for the protected area to meet the conditions of the IUCN Green List standard. The next slide will explain what this is. So what is the IUCN Green List? It's a certification program that recognizes effectively managed and fairly governed terrestrial and marine protected and conserved areas that are achieving the conservation outcomes. It is organized around 4 components you can see on the right here. Each component has a set of criteria, and criteria are further broken down into indicators against which to measure achievement. A protected area must achieve all criteria across all 4 components in order to be accepted for the IUCN Green List. To do so, the protected area needs to apply, and then a group of experts provide an assessment. The next slide will show you a map that shows that, just to be clear, this green list is both for terrestrial and marine protected area, even though today we focus on MPAs. But the concept I'm about to tell you about could be used on terrestrial PAs too. So far, 30 MPAs globally achieved the Green List standards. In area terms, if it was a country, the IUCN Green List would be the 38th largest one. So how to use the IUCN Green List to create a financial instrument? Okay, this is a relatively long and complex slide, so let me just take a little moment to make sure it's properly. Yes, we're good. Okay, so here is what we propose. In a given jurisdiction, one or several candidate MPAs generate a management plan, including a detailed budget and anticipated timing to be in line with Green List status. Lenders pay the principal equal to the total amount of funding for each MPA to the PA authority, which is then distributed to each MPA. The fund helps MPA improve the conservation efficiency so that they can apply to the Green List. Every time that an MPA gets the IUCN Green List status, the PA authority refunds the investors plus an interest with funds from the government, donors, or any other source of finance. If the MPAs do not secure the Green List, investors only get a portion of their money back to be decided. On the next slide, we will see a completely made up example, I'll have to be honest, to see how this could be done. I have to warn you, there will be here more numbers than, let's say, dots on my shirt, so please bear with me. Imagine that 10 MPAs in Malaysia, for instance, would be interested to participate. First, they compile the budget, management plan, and costs to meet the green list status. Let's assume that this would be $9 million over 5 years, plus $1 million of transaction cost. That would be legal and structuring fees, upfront costs, etc. By the way, these amounts are theoretical, not representative of the reality. Then Malaysia would issue a $10 million green list bond over 5 years at 5%, which is 2% over the interest it pays on a 5-year bond. Why the premium? Well, it's linked to the specific risk that investors take, namely the likelihood that the MPAs do not achieve the green list status. Let's also assume a 25% haircut if the green list status is not obtained at maturity. By haircut, I do not refer to, well, to my urgent need to have one really, but to the proportion of the funding that is not repaid by the government in case the green list status is not achieved. If all MPAs get the green list, investors get a 3% return per annum, assuming they pay for 100% of transaction costs. The government receives 10 million back, and the government, receives 10 million, but needs to pay back 11.5 over 5 years. So their cost for them is also 3% per annum. Coincidentally, this is in line with their existing interest cost, but with certainty of conservation efficiency. The funds are paid only after the green list status is achieved. If instead no MPA secures the green list, the government refunds 8.6 million, investors have lost 1.4, including the interest. So I hope this wasn't too much in terms of numbers, and we can now move to the next slide. Hopefully, this number showed you a few things. In terms of challenges, deciding who pays for the transaction costs, agreeing on haircut and interest are key. Whether an intermediary is needed to act as the issuer is another one. Perverse incentives also need to be avoided. For instance, one should ensure that the bond is not shortable. Otherwise, a financial gain could be made if its value went down, which would incentivize all sorts of negative behaviors. On the next slide, though, we'll see that this instrument, at least in my opinion, could be a compelling instrument for investors for many reasons. Investing in efficient conservation is the obvious one. But the risk reward could be another one, depending on how the bond is structured. In effect, the IUCN Green List bond would be similar to many existing ESG bonds, and recent history showed us that this is a model that can be scaled and replicated very well. At a higher level, it has been proven many times in the scientific literature that returns on investment in marine conservation is high, and any increased funding for an area could generate spillover benefits for the local area, which could also positively affect communities and local businesses in which investors have a stake. On the next slide, we'll see that for issuers of the bond, advantages are the same. But the main one is that the green list bond is an outcome-based financing mechanism. That means that the risk of failing to achieve conservation progress is transferred, at least partially, onto investors. The other key advantage is that the funds are likely to come from, say, impact investors and not cannibalize existing funding for MPAs. And in addition, the learnings associated with the improved management efficiency of obtaining the green list status are applicable to other areas or protected areas of the same jurisdiction. And finally, on the next slide, for the MPAs themselves, the benefits are pretty straightforward. Greater level of funding, greater conservation efficiency, but also greater visibility, which could be leveraged for, let's say, communication purposes, for instance. On the next slide, I think, just to wrap this part up, I think the key question here is whether any of you think that such a concept could work, and if so, how to take it forward. So let me just provide some additional context before moving on to the Q&A. The following slide will show, and that's not a surprise, of course, that MPAs are generally governed by public institutions. So it is up to governments to consider whether this concept is interesting. The next slide will explain which government we're talking about. Well, of course, it depends on how you look at things. It could be any government, of course. If you think in terms of areas covered, the countries shown here account for the majority of existing MPAs in area terms. That includes area beyond national jurisdiction, of course. Now, on the next slides, another way to look at this is to find out where MPAs are needed in the future and see which countries would benefit from linking funding to conservation efficiency immediately from the design phase of the MPAs. That's why here we're showing the largest areas of new conservation priorities in each continent. However, the downside is that we push further down the line the impact of this instrument, because we're talking about an area of MPA that doesn't exist yet. So in my opinion, this instrument would be better suited to existing MPAs. So that was it in terms of formal presentation. On the next slide, once again, I would like to say that the point of today was to show that marine protected areas often fail to achieve the conservation goals, but that solutions exist. In particular, linking funding for MPAs to improved conservation efficiency could be efficient. And I believe that the IUCN Green List bond would be a good way to do so. So we should make this happen. Now I'm checking whether anyone in the room has asked any question. And so we have a Q&A. We have a question here that I will read out loud and try to answer. Rather than spending efforts and money on a new unproven concept, would it not be better to focus on addressing the many environmental reasons that threaten conservation success instead? Okay, so just repeating the question. Rather than spending efforts and money on a new unproven concept, would it not be better to focus on addressing the many environmental reasons that threaten conservation success instead? Okay, well, that's an easy one to start with. I think addressing these environmental threats is, of course, the priority. Money needs and funding needs to be spent on them. I think the point we're trying to make is that funds should be spent efficiently. Countries owe it to their people, whose taxes fund these efforts, by the way. And so, for instance, if a country were to apply for a IUCN Green List for its MPA network, but yet made no efforts to reduce, say, harmful fishing subsidies, plastic pollution, fertilizer leakage, that would be effectively a clear cognitive dissonance. And so the second point I hope I tried to make today is to show that financial markets actually have a role in sanctioning this type of cognitive dissonance, and on the opposite, rewarding efficient conservation. they can do so by clearly linking efficiency to payment terms. So in summary, this kind of bond would work best in a jurisdiction that generally is on the right way to protect its ocean, but not quite there yet. I hope this answered the question. We've got another question from the audience here that says, can fishing companies claim ESG credits for buying the bond? Now it's an interesting question, and I would say, of course, it all depends on how these bonds are structured. My immediate answer would be to say that this is not the actual purpose of the structure of the bond. But again, I hope that the presentation was not too prescriptive into saying how exactly this bond would be conceived and structured. I think we're at such an early stage of developing this concept that effectively many different structures could be developed. So depending on how the structure of the bond is agreed, this could be possible. Before moving on to the next question, let's just check whether James Hardcastle in the room, whether you are ready to speak. If so, I have a few questions for you, of course. James, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining today.
It's okay. Can I just quickly, could you just give a quick introduction, because we had connection issues, and we're here at the CBD in Geneva with some participants here who've missed the presentation. So maybe you could just give a summary or just give an introduction, and then yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for the delay.
No, I apologize for that. And yes, so in summary, what the point we made today was that the 1-minute summary is that marine protected areas often fail to achieve the conservation goals. One way to solve this would be to link the funding to the conservation efficiency. And one way to actually achieve that would be to create a new financial instrument where effectively the conservation efficiency would condition the payment terms. So we call that the IUCN Green List bond, where let's say a network of MPA or a single MPA, actually it doesn't really matter, would issue a bond to reach a certain level of conservation progress measured by attainment of the IUCN Green List. And once this is done, investors would get part of the money back from typical sources, so typically government or donors. That's the very short summary. So I hope this was okay, and if so, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the IUCN Green List so that people understand how it would work and how it could be applied for this financing.
Sure. Okay, so I can just give a quick connection from what I understand the idea is, which is about payments for performance, payments for outcomes to marine protected areas, linked to a standard that can measure the incremental steps in terms of progress, and also set a bar for what effectiveness or what success looks like. So in other words, what that outcome, the desired outcome is, so that the payments can be tied to delivering progress, delivering an outcome, delivering a result. And that result can be independently verified, that there's some assurance that can be applied to give some guarantee that targets have been met, progress has been made, outcomes delivered, and so then the payment is released. Is that a good summary of?
That's a much better summary than mine. So it's very good. Don't worry.
Okay, so, good. Yeah. So I can mention the Green List a little bit about how it could potentially do that. And just by way of introduction, so I'm James Hardcastle. I work with IUCN's Global Protected and Conserved Areas program, areas team. And I head the global level of IUCN, and one of our flagship initiatives is the Green List of Protected and Conserved Areas. And the Green List is, at its heart, it's a sustainability standard. So firstly, it's a standard that describes successful area-based conservation, terrestrial and marine. So it's a generic standard that helps sites to benchmark their performance against the IUCN definition of what success looks like. So that's the standard. Then the sustainability piece is that we are developing an assurance mechanism that is all about progress. It's all about improvement. It's all about mentoring and support to help areas move towards achieving that standard and able to measure the steps that they take. So that's why it was easy for me to link to the financing, because that's exactly what we're hoping to do with the Green List. One of the challenges with any sustainability standard is the assurance mechanism, the verification, the independence, and also then the trade-off between the complexity of an assurance mechanism and the complexity of the assessment methodology, and the need also for something quite simple that works for, as you've said, at least 60% public agency managed marine protected areas, mostly short-staffed, mostly under-resourced, mostly extremely busy with multiple demands on their time. So we need to have something that is robust and is constructed in a way that is independent and can be assured, meets standard with the methodologies and guidance and tools, but at the same time is applicable in marine protected areas all over the world. So that is our real challenge. And to date, we've been piloting this. We've developed it over the last 10 years or so. We're working in more than 60 countries. We have pushing 1,000 protected and conserved areas engaged. And our actual kind of the verification system, the certification, we have 60 who are verified, certified by IUCN to meet this standard. And that certification is done through an independent assurance mechanism that is carried out by Accreditation Services International, now called Assurance Services International. So we have that independent mechanism. So we're really pushing the proof of concept, the test, and we're at that point where we want to scale up. And so far, the whole system has relied on basically contributions from IUCN, contributions from our experts, contributions from the countries, contributions from the marine protected areas participating. So there isn't at the moment a kind of a financial model built in. So it's not like Marine Stewardship Council or Forest Stewardship Council or others where you have a market-based mechanism. It's very much done to suit the market that we have, which is marine protected area, practitioners, experts in countries where resources are at a premium. So our model has to be really kind of close like that. But we do have, I think, a proven concept where we can verify the impacts of investment, the impacts of programs, projects, management decisions on the effectiveness of area-based conservation, in particular marine. And we're advancing that and trying to make it more accessible, more amenable. So adding a finance mechanism, especially for marine protected areas, could be really, really interesting, because it would link the incentive of finance to the investment, the mentoring, the help, the technical support to deliver the successful conservation. So you're basically adding an incentive onto the will, the political will, the policy, the practice, the expertise. So it's really high potential. And we would be delighted to co-develop or to help develop further this idea, and to see if there's country or countries where potentially we could test a model with an outcome buyer, somebody who wants to see effective area-based conservation and is willing to invest, public or private. And then we can bring in the assurance, bring in the expertise to help help the particular marine protected area or protected area network to demonstrate the improved performance and to showcase the results that they achieve. And so that we can all see an improvement in conservation. We can all see the recognition that this work is being done, that it's independently verified, and that then the resources can be made available for that particular example, but also in other places as well. So that's probably too much And just to caveat, I don't know anything about banking and finance and outcome payments and all these things, really coming at it from a nature conservation perspective, but that absolutely must be simple, and it must be something that is cost effective. We can't afford to have a costly system that you need to go through in order to get resources to help you cover the costs. You know what I mean? It has to be very, very tangible and something that's operational. In pick a country in the world where there's important marine resources, that's where we need to start. Thanks.
Thank you, James. And now that was very helpful and interesting, and complemented very well what I said. And perhaps one thing that one point that I try to make during the presentation is that this type of instrument could be scaled and replicable. So of course, the first and the hardest part would be to successfully develop the first instance of this instrument applied to a specific jurisdiction. But then would you agree with me that once this is done, learnings could be shared, and the same instrument, or in a slightly modified manner, of course, adapted to the local landscape, could be developed? And maybe linked to that, would you be able to tell us whether any example of any type of areas in particular, whether land, ocean, or any specific jurisdiction would be perhaps most appropriate for this type of instrument, or is it too early to tell?
Okay, so I missed the first bit of the question. Could you just repeat the first element?
The first element is whether you think that this concept would be scalable and could be replicable relatively easily once the first is developed.
Okay, thanks. So I'm looking at the people in the room here who missed the earlier presentation, but we have a couple of questions here for after as well, so I'll manage that. Scalable, that's always the challenge. When we develop new tools, methodologies, they're always piloted, there's always a test, there's a demonstration. The challenge is really to go to scale. And my understanding, which the caveat is limited, is that finance and financing, this kind of new and additional finance for nature conservation, operates at scales that are not always compatible with the needs and the demands that we want at the site level. And to quote a colleague from Vietnam, that we don't need, in many protected and conserved areas, we don't need a banquet at New Year. We just need a couple of bowls of rice every day. Like that, we just need the basic kind of costs. And those costs that are really needed and more sustainable are not the type of level of bankable product. I've heard the terms, investable product that you hear. So what we do have the chance here is to link the smaller needs with a larger investment cycle, is that having multiple protected areas and conserved areas participating at the same time, networks as well, because the standard is consistent and the standard can be applied across different sites. So you could have an outcome, for example, the impact is to improve 100 protected areas by 10% against the standard. Some might do 20, some drop back, you're spreading the risk, but also you're able to spread the resources across a larger area. And I think that in particular, applying this to marine protected area networks in one jurisdiction could be really interesting. Then you're starting to get that investment that's needed at a scale that is more than the 10,000 needed here, or the 50,000 there, or the 15,000 for a process there. It starts to add up to something that you could bank something for 100, 200, 500,000 that covers a whole system. So I think a system level approach is appropriate. And that leads to the second question, is with the IUCN Green List, it is designed to get down to the granular detail. So the standard is for area-based conservation, but it's equally applicable across networks and scales. And we have one example in California in the United States, where they're applying the standard to networks of marine protected areas. And there's 124 along the coast of California who are all going through the same process. So the success of one area is linked to its role in that network, and the outcomes are network outcomes, not individual. Although you also need to go down to the site level in terms of like good governance, the relationship with local fishers, and some kind of micro or smaller scale elements. Another country where we're working is the Maldives, where we're looking at kind of whole atoll it's broadly marine protected areas, but it's much more marine conserved areas. It's looking at the inclusive level of local governance, local participation, different zoning of different areas for multiple uses. So that's another scale which could be applicable. Just here, there's Kevin Ruhoman from Mauritius. We're discussing as well a commitment from Mauritius. Oh, fantastic. So we have a lady from Mauritius as well here, representative, but Mauritius, for example, could be a fantastic case. And also because Mauritius, whenever there's something new and innovative, Mauritius is in there, but they're doing something, you know, if it's DLT or it's, you know, on geothermal energy, like the list of Mauritian innovations is very high. So I think finding a combination of more enabled countries like California would be good. But I think where we really need to see this model work is in countries like Mauritius, who are, you know, have the framework in place, they have the legal policy, and are able to maybe take on something like this. Maldives also, and other, I think, island nations, small island states could be very, very interesting.
Thank you, James. That was very helpful. Let us know, by the way, if there are some questions or from the room, or if anyone wants to comment. And just to say, yeah, I'm conscious to people in the room. So if you have missed part of the presentation, feel free to reach out directly. We will email you the presentation. It will also be uploaded on our website. And yeah, apologies for that. I
can show it after. It's on the thing here. But
okay.
There's two questions in the room. Could I take those from the room?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. So firstly, the gentleman here, and then maybe I could ask Mauritius representative to say something. The camera's there. So.
Okay, I can. Yeah, I'm Sebastian Nichols. I work with the Pew Charitable Trust on our 30 by 30 campaign and areas beyond national jurisdictions. Thank you for these presentations. It's been very interesting and enlightening. I think if I understood, so I have two questions. One, if I understood correctly, the outcome-based financing is dependent on the management standards, so not necessarily biodiversity outcomes of these protected areas. So I just wanted to confirm if that's accurate. It might not be. And then the other question I have, so the California Marine Protected Area Network is a great example, and I've done a lot of diving there. I've been lucky to. That's a place where, for example, climate change is impacting the effectiveness of those protected areas. So I wonder if the Green List standard or this kind of concept of outcome-based financing takes into account adaptive management that is evolving to address changing threats and risks to the ecosystems that are being protected and conserved.
Thank you, Sebastian. James, if that's okay, I can take the first question and you can answer the second one. Would that work?
Okay, please.
Yes. Okay. So yes, and apologies again for those who missed part of the presentation. So let me quickly reply. Basically recap what it was about. What would this instrument look like and how it would work? So in theory, in brief, in a given jurisdiction, one or several candidate MPAs would generate a management plan, including their detailed budget, the anticipated timing to be in line with the Green List status. That would be the goal of this instrument. Why? Because the IUCN Green List status would effectively signify, and at least that's the message, and that's the way to measure it for investors. That would mean, okay, well, conservation outcomes are being reached. So once this is done, and we know how much it would cost and what would be the process to achieve this status, then of course that would require funding. This is where the financial markets would come in. Lenders would pay the principal equal to the total amount of funding for each MPA to the PA authority, then redistributed to each MPA, meaning that then now the MPAs would have the funds to improve their conservation efficiency, i.e. to apply to the Green List and hopefully secure the status. And then, of course, every time that the MPA gets the IUCN Green List status, investors would need to be refunded plus an interest to be decided. The funds would come from the traditional source of funding from MPAs, so typically a government. And well, if MPAs do not secure the green list status, investors would get back only a portion of the money. So they wouldn't get back 100%, of course. They probably wouldn't get back zero either, otherwise it would probably be too risky. So of course that would need to be decided on a case by case. So I hope that was clear, and maybe James, you can tell us about California, because I've never dived in California on my side, so I don't think I can answer that question.
Okay, sure. I've never dived in California either. I've dived in Mauritius, but I've been whale watching in California. It's a fantastic place. There's so much more we need to do in the marine area, and I think the question that you raised about the management, and I think Francois, you were talking about the link to management. We're looking at beyond management. Like the Green List standard is something that gets into the results of management, the outcomes, and that's what you need to show. That's the difference between a site that is like a candidate to the Green List and one that can demonstrate success is based on the outcomes. The other piece of the Green List, which is really important, is around good governance and equity in conservation. So it's not just about the biodiversity outcomes, it's also about the equity and the justice and the kind of the rights-based approaches which will lead you to good outcomes as well. So really what the Green List will ask of a marine protected area is this area set up in a just way? Is the governance fair? Is it equitable? Like, are there any legacy issues? Are there things that need to be resolved? In which case, please resolve them, and then we'll work with you to do that. The second one is around the design and the planning. What is this protected area for? And it sounds a silly question, but in many cases, it's like, well, I think there was some, well, maybe let's look. There was some reason it was established, and there's forest and there's fish and these things, but really getting down to what are the key values. And those values are biodiversity, those values are ecosystem services, those values are cultural heritage, those values are other tangible things, health benefits, and so on. There's a whole basket of values that will be identified, not just by the management, but also by the local stakeholders. And so you have a kind of a collective picture, what is important in this area. And based on that list of values, that is what you are looking to demonstrate outcomes for. So if you are just, if your value is marine mammals, then your marine protected area will have a contribution to some part of the life cycle or kind of the part of these marine mammals. So but make sure that your management is addressing that. It's not like, oh yeah, we have whales, but we don't really, they come in and they go. You've got to have some, are you monitoring them? Are you reducing kind of external impacts? So, what is it that is helping contribute to these marine mammals in this case? And that also lends itself to the scale, because quite often a single area's contribution is not significant, but a network's contribution really is. So this is where in California, that scaling up across the network would also link with the scaling up of the resources needed, and that kind of collective sense of what effectiveness is beyond just the site, but its role in the landscape, its role in the seascape, its role socially and ecologically. So I think that hopefully.
Sorry, just to follow up, my question was more about like the part of the Green List here. So whether you're also assessing whether these protected and conserved areas are reacting and updating their management plans based on a new threat, be it climate change or pollution impacts that weren't foreseen initially, whatever it might be.
So the Green List is goes in 5-year cycles, pretty much like IUCN. We do 4 years, Green List 5 years. So any recognition has a 5-year kind of time frame. In the 5th year, you have to do a kind of a renewal. And basically update your evidence, update the plans, update the things there. But there is also there's criterion in the Green List about adaptive management, and even adaptive governance. So how are you integrating the results of the monitoring back into the management? How are you integrating kind of some of the social change, legal change back into management? There is also one more aspect, and that is that there's an alerts and a triggers in the Green List as well. So if something happens in year 2, a change of manager, there's an oil spill, there's whatever the issue is, that can flag a review of the status and potentially with some diagnosis of what needs to be done to maintain the Green List standard, and potentially you could lose the Green List status. So you come off the Green List until those things are fixed, and then you go back on again. So it's not like like my degree, like I studied that, I think, 8 years ago, and I've got the certificate, no one can take that away. right? So that's it. I'm a BA and an MSc and whatever else, right? Bang. But with the Green List, you need to keep it up to date and you need to keep it current. It means globally we can adapt the standard as well. We can add new things as the world changes, and climate change, for example, is really, really much more of a front, you know, pressing topic that perhaps we need to look at the Green List again and make it more explicit. So maybe that's something then in the next cycle that sites would be asked to update their climate responses, their climate adaptation mitigation. Mauritius, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Husna Nujia from Mauritius, and as you all must be aware that Mauritius is often globally referred to as a paradise island. Yes, it's a paradise island with beautiful beaches and the greenish blue water, marine water. And we do have our marine protected areas, but we are constantly, as a small island developing states, we also constantly faced with challenges such as climate change, ocean acidification, and coral bleaching, all these challenges, but we do have our management plans. But I was just going to clarify whether this financing mechanism, do we need to be registered first on the IUCN Green List and then we can apply for it? Or how does it function? And secondly, whether such a financing mechanism would also apply to terrestrial green listing, or is it conferred to marine biodiversity only? But then I would also agree that adaptive management is very essential here, because just recently we had the Wakasho oil spill. It was very near to our Blue Bay Marine Park. It's a protected area, and it was quite of an obstacle, and it quite impacted the marine environment. So if tomorrow we are on the green list and we have a time frame of, you mentioned that it's a 5-year cycle, and then if within that 5-year cycle you fail to demonstrate the outcomes, then or you delisted from the green list? Because I'm quite new to this green list, mechanism. And I would also urge, the IUCN, maybe it's a bit unfair, I don't know, incorrect for me to pronounce myself, because at home I'm from the government. Government fonctionnaire. So we have this feeling that IUCN is more biased for working with NGOs, non-governmental organization. And there's only one spokesperson in my country who is always on the front liner with IUCN, and we don't even, as a government body, we don't even get the right or opportunity or appropriate opportunity to express ourselves as a regulatory body. And we want in future to work more closely and collaboratively with IUCN, because it's high time that back at home we establish a steering committee. We want to have a green list for the terrestrial biodiversity, and also to have to work with the marine sector to have this kind of green list for the marine sector also, because we feel that it will definitely, if we have a green list, it will definitely, like always we have this, that Mauritius is a famous land of the dodo. The dodo has been extinct. So many species are going for extinction, on the brink of extinction each and every day. But it's not the case. We are really striving to work to conserve, to protect our unique biodiversity for the future generation. And I feel that it would be a very useful, tool or mechanism to have this green list, so that we have a roadmap, we have an inspiration to work towards something very positive for the marine and terrestrial biodiversity, and also to have this green image for Mauritius as well. So thank you.
Thank you, James. Very quickly, and thank you so much. It's a great honor and pleasure to have interest from Mauritius for this concept. Just to answer very briefly to part of your answer, and I'll let James deal with the hardest part on the IUCN Green List. But yes, once again, the concept could be applied to both terrestrial and marine protected areas. The presentation today focused on marine protected areas simply because you know that was the topic we had in mind, and we covered this angle as well. But of course, because the IUCN Green List covers both the terrestrial and marine protected areas, the associated financing could also cover both types. And related to how to apply to the Green List and and to this bond, first, I have to tell you that right now this is a concept. We can only make it happen if people like you are interested and want to develop this further. The first step would be, as I said, to try to understand better what are the steps that are required for you for any of the protected areas in Mauritius to achieve the Green List. So what would that mean? What are the steps that will need to be taken, and how long and how much would it cost? And I think it's best for you to do that in partnership with the IUCN directly. And so I'm sure James will be able to tell you more about this.
Thanks, Francois. I think the second part of your question was very interesting. I'm interested in the answer to that question. Is if you have a payment based on an outcome, so if you have an investment that is to improve and to achieve a certain result, then the payment is made. But if the next day that outcome drops off, then what happens? So I think some mechanism that would look at maybe a staged payment over those 5 years. Again, I'm not financing, but that would give the incentive also to maintain the standards, not to give a huge push to achieve, and then it's like, okay, next, and then things drop off again. So also with the financing, that has more the idea that the financing is something sustained or sustainable. So I think some kind of performance, I don't know the terminology, but some kind of payment, annual, whatever, check. No? Some kind of payment system could be interesting. With the Green List, then yeah, there is that 5 years, and if something major happens, then it could drop off. We have a few cases already where this alert system has been tested. In one case, it was around a change in policy that allowed commercial fishing, so commercial as in sport fishing, inside of the marine protected area. The local stakeholders objected to that. That caused a review of the Green List, and then actually the government backed off on that policy. That's one example. Another example was it turned out that there was an indigenous community in a protected area who felt they had not been consulted properly at the establishment of the protected area, and they didn't feel that the green listing was conducive to that. And so the conversation has gone back to involve them, and that there's a review of that particular site and green the status. Another one, there was illegal gold mining that the community themselves raised. This is a community conserved area. They wanted help with the illegal gold mining polluting the waters, and then they used the Green List to get support for that, and there was an operation that helped control that, and so the green listing was maintained. So it's just 3 examples of how that kind of works. In terms of IUCN, so you said we're 2 NGO, and the NGOs say we're 2 government, and that's just life as IUCN. It's always, it's navigating that middle space and convening. And we're unique that our members are state members, government agencies, and the NGOs. And in particular, the Green List as a standard is also neutral. So when you have the case of the NGO saying you're not doing this, and you're saying we're doing that, the standard is something that is IUCN, so it's collective. The World Commission on Protected Areas oversee the standard and the content. So it's consistent, and it can be used as neutral. So if the NGO member is saying this isn't good enough, and you're saying yes it is, well then compare it to the standard, get a judgment, independent evaluation of the performance on that. So it can be useful as a benchmark, because up to now there hasn't been one. There's a lot of best practice guidance, there's a lot of methodologies, but what actually does success look like? What is the standard for effectiveness? That's kind of missing. So we're hoping that the Green List can fill that niche. It's unique in that aspect. It's the first time we've really decided to describe what effectiveness looks like in protected and conserved areas. And then that gives us the opportunity we've never had before for financing linked to that. So we can actually have a potential, and again, this is exploratory, a potential bond mechanism that is linked to outcomes, linked to payments for outcomes, payments for performance. that would help achieve that. So that's where we're hoping that we can test this, and maybe Mauritius is the place. In terms of Mauritius, we'll follow up directly and.
Yes, I would like just a small addition. So for us, we are more interested like in technology transfer, be it for terrestrial marine. Like I can give you one example is that we had this coral farming ex situ in laboratories, but when they were transported, there has been many like a huge percentage of dieback. So there, if this kind of financing mechanism, we could have, to benefit from such financing mechanism, like the government works with these external funding, like government co-funding, and then it would be very promising, like to have all these technology transfer, so that we could have capacity building, how we can improve on such systems, because this is for the marine health. We have zoning in our marine protected area, but the one that is the core zone, we found that there has been certain dieback and coral bleaching. So that's one example. And also on the second part, would be very grateful if we could have this kind of solidarity between the government and IUCN, so that in future we can work more closely, be it for red listing or green listing. So that would be our request, humble request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful and interesting. Perhaps James, you can answer directly, or it's in private. Maybe that would perhaps be better. If we have no more questions from the online audience, so unless there's any urgent question, one more question from the room.
Hello, I'm not sure it's urgent, but still, it's, well, comments on the question. I'm from the Global Environment Facility. And as you know, we are always interested in developing innovative tools. It's maybe less well known as part of our work, as we do mainly grants, but we also do blended finance. A couple of days ago, we launched with the World Bank the Rhino Bond, where we provide the outcome payment to deliver conservation benefits to black rhinos in South Africa. A couple of years ago with the World Bank, again, well, 4 years ago, we helped Seychelles in launching the first sovereign blue bonds. So we are interested in those tools. And so I had two questions. First, on the marine space, compared to a sovereign blue bond where the proceeds are used, they were used for MPAs in the Seychelles, but also for blue economy in general, fishing, etc. How do you think that a specific tool for MPAs is more or less attractive to mainly governments and outcome payers in that type of tools, and your reflection on that compared to more generic blue bonds would be interesting. And the second question, which relates to the question of Mauritius, is given, well, the probable commitments on the 30 by 30 target, wouldn't be in terms of scaling of the investment and getting investor interest and outcome payer interest, why not directly going at the national protected area level, terrestrial and marine in general, because, and I'm interested in having your views on how it would be more attractive to outcome payers like us, governments, because it would be at the system level, given the upcoming commitments, and investors in terms of scale. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. James, would you like to reply, or should I? I don't know if we can hear you in the room, but we can't hear you online, sorry.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so the microphone turned off. So firstly, just really welcoming the commitment from the Global Environment Facility. We're aware of the different work on bonds. We are looking to get some dialogue around lessons learned so far, certainly with the Rhino bonds, and to also promote the Green List standard and other kind of mechanisms, bring together some actors this year to really discuss how we can take it further. So I'd love to link all this together from our part. In terms of why marine protected areas, well, I think you kind of answered it with the 30 by 30 question afterwards. We need to scale up what we're doing. We need obviously to link into seascapes, landscapes, the whole kind of blue economy, production, all these things. But ultimately, success will be determined on the effectiveness of these areas and how they're able to deliver these conservation outcomes and deliver the benefits. So they are the critical piece. And to my knowledge, there is no other standard system that is assured, that is credible, that can verify those outcomes. We're of course very familiar with the management effectiveness tracking tool. It's something that IUCN also supports and promotes, and other related methodologies. And those are all encapsulated by the Green List standard. So if you have carried out as part of a GEF project, your MET, you can literally take the results and just plug them in against the standard, and you'll see, it's about an 80% correlation. The gaps are really around, which the MET was not designed for, no, but the gaps are around the outcomes, and the gaps are a little bit around equity and good governance. But otherwise, the Green List builds on existing data, existing tools, existing information. So I think that there's a connection there. The final piece was, I think around working at national level. That's absolutely where the game is at. And I think all the last 2 weeks, for those who've been, obviously here and listening, there's a huge need to support countries, support parties at national level. In translating what this discussion is, all the brackets and everything else, like what does that mean at a national level? How can we increase, whatever the target is, we need to increase the extent and the effectiveness of area-based conservation in countries. And for that, we need resources. And to get the resources, we really need to link it to the results. The money on its own, the funding on its own will not result in effective conservation. We need the technology transfer, the capacity development, the exchange of experiences, and we need resources targeted to the places where they most need them. And those include protected areas, marine and terrestrial. And we'd love to have a national scale. We operate the Green List at a national jurisdiction scale as well. Maybe Mauritius could be an early adopter for that. Francois?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I would fully agree with what's just been said. If I just put my finance hat on for 1 minute, I would just add that why, in terms of this IUCN Green List bond versus a more general blue bond, I think finance markets really like simplicity. So here, an easy way to measure success or result is, have you achieved the Green List? Yes, no, that's it. And so, it could be something that is sold, if you want, like the elevator pitch could be done in about 30 seconds, and the result could also be measured very quickly. It's like a yes or no answer that would then, trigger a list of whatever payments and conditions, etc. So I think here the key is the simplicity of the product. But thank you. I'm aware of the time as well. Because of some issues with the room, we overrun already. So if there are more questions, perhaps feel free to address them directly to James in the room or to me for the online participants.
I think the overriding message there is simplicity. And I think that just an important point as well with the Green List is it is not a gold standard. Achieving the Green List is not like excellence and it's only a few that can do it. The standard is designed to be achievable and is designed for any protected or conserved area anywhere to potentially achieve it, especially with the investment. So the Green List, each of the criterion, and there's 17 at the moment, so it's not that much. Yeah, it's not as simple. We could make it simpler, but it's not, it's marine protected areas are complex. So there's only a certain point that you can simplify it. But the idea is that each of those criterion just describes what effectiveness can look like. It describes like doing a good job. It describes a pass. But the excellence comes in meeting each one of those criterion to a level that is effectiveness. So it's not good enough just to have we have a great management plan. It's not good enough. You need to have all the other elements of governance, the design and planning, identifying your values, monitoring system, and then some ability to decide what success looks like and to say whether you're being successful or not. So it's a combination that is the excellence. It's not the each one. You have to have the best management plan in the world, and you must be a World Heritage Area, and you must have, you know, everybody making money from tourism, and it's just like the best place. That's not the Green List. The Green List is about, within the constraints that you have as an area, within the context of the country, within the context of the landscape or seascape, are you doing the best job that you can with the resources that you have? If so, Green List. And so the more we can link it to financing, more we can link it to new ideas, new concepts, new experiences, then we can scale it up. And in scaling it up, we can make it more simple, we can make it more accessible. And maybe at not this COP, but the one after, we'd really have you know, something bankable to present to parties to say, this could be part of the answer in achieving not just 30%, but an effective 30% that's fair, that is conserving biodiversity, that's conserving all the other values that are important as well. So that's my sign off.
In 2 words, efficient simplicity. That's great. Thank you so much for everyone for joining today, and apologies again for all these failures and for technical failures, but I think we had a very interesting conversation. Please reach out if you want the presentation or if you have more questions. Thank you so much, and do feel free to continue the conversation in the room, of course. Thank you, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.